Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining this conversation. Composting is a growing industry, but it's still available in too few cities across the United States. According to a 2023 report by the Environmental Protection Agency, only 5% of food waste was composted in 2019, and that's the last year for which the government has data. But there are many materials besides food, from yard waste to compostable packaging, that could be returned to the soil through healthy regenerative programs. And in recent years, access to composting services has grown by 65%, according to Environmental America. Our guest today is Michelle Carnevale, president of 11th Hour Racing, which advocates for sustainability and ocean health with solutions designed to create a more inclusive future. Michelle recently contributed an article to Earth911 called How You Can Help Create a Healthier Ocean by Composting. The connection between groundwater, composting, and the oceans is too little understood, so I wanted to have Michelle join the conversation to talk about these issues and 11th Hour Racing's long-term goals. You can learn more about the organization at 11th Hour Racing. 11th is the numbers 11th, Hour Racing, all one word, no space, no dash, 11thhourracing.org. We'll start the conversation in just a moment after this quick commercial break. Welcome to the show, Michelle. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for the article because it was an interesting read and I want to dig into that. But before we do, tell us about how 11th Hour Racing came to be and what's the mission and how does your background fit into all that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So 11th Hour Racing, our mission is to advance solutions and practices that protect and restore the health of our ocean. And we do this through a unique way of harnessing the power of sport, philanthropic grant making, and storytelling. We were founded close to 14 years ago now, maybe 15, and we were founded by philanthropist Wendy Schmidt and her co-founders, Jeremy Pochman and Rob McMillan. They are all avid sailors. And 14, 15 years ago, they were struck when they went to events and sailing races and regattas with the excessive amount of single-use plastic that were being used by sporting teams and at these events. And they thought, what if we could use this platform of sport, of sailing, the sport of sailing, as a way to engage people around more sustainable practices? And so that's where it all began. It started small with things like, how do we get more reusable water bottles and refilling stations? And over the past 14 years, we've expanded now to be more of a global enterprise organization. We have a portfolio of grants that are like around the world, 50 or so organizations that we support. We are reaching millions of people through different sporting events and public events. And really this idea of how do you use sports and storytelling and athletes as a way to reach a wider audience of people, not just the traditional environmental or green or sustainability audience. So that's where we started. We're doing a lot more now. And as we'll talk about, composting is a huge initiative for us. And we'll talk more about how that relates to ocean health. But really, everything we do is for the ocean.
How did you get involved?
So I started close to like 8 or 9 years ago. I was actually a grantee of 11th Hour Racing, and I worked on offshore renewable energy, climate change policy, marine science and education. And once I learned that this organization needed, some more staff support, more capacity, it was so exciting to join this team because I think philanthropy in general is an exciting space because you can be a catalyst for change, right? Like you can take risks and you can invest in new ideas and initiatives and innovation in a way that maybe, other types of funding organizations can't. And to be able to put effort and support and invest in this paradigm shift to a more sustainable future is like incredibly gratifying. And like, I'm grateful to be able to do this work.
What's another example besides composting, which of course we'll talk about, of an 11th hour racing program that you've put in place, and particularly with a focus on inclusivity, because I know that's another emphasis that you have.
Yes, a lot of our grant making is focused on inclusivity and how do we build the next generation of ocean stewards. So through youth development programs, workforce development, opportunities for women in the sport of sailing, or diversity within the marine industry, providing opportunities, access, education, outreach to really have ocean literacy and appreciation for how important the ocean is for all of us, how we can build that in the next generation so that in the future, there's greater stewardship and collective action around all of these issues.
The organization has corporate sponsors, as you talked about. Is it self-sustaining, or does it rely on continued philanthropic donations by the founders and others?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 11th Hour Racing, we're part of Eric and Wendy Schmidt's philanthropic network of organizations and initiatives. They're all related to how to make the world more resilient, how to create more sustainability in the world. So we're fully funded, and we use that funding to invest and catalyze change in coastal communities and the marine industry around the world. So
I want to talk about the composting article. Can you start off, can you summarize for us, what's the relationship between home composting and ocean health? That unless you live at the shore, a lot of people wouldn't make that connection.
Yes, and I completely appreciate that because I have been working in ocean-related fields for like 25 years, and I did not realize how important soil health was to ocean health until recently, until we started this work. But the reality is that you can't have a healthy ocean without healthy soil. They're connected systems. And composting is really nature's way of recycling nutrients and carbon and nitrogen. And when we take food waste and we put it in the landfill, it degrades and produces all of this carbon dioxide, methane gas, which is warming the atmosphere. And methane is like 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide at warming the planet. And the fact is, our oceans are taking the brunt of that. The ocean has absorbed like 90% of the excess heat in the atmosphere. So all of our decisions about what we throw in the trash can have a direct impact on the ocean ultimately. But when you take food waste out of the garbage can and instead you compost it, not only are you reducing greenhouse gases, you're eliminating all of that production of methane from the landfill. But then when compost is produced and then applied back to the soil, healthy soil actually sucks carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it back in the ground. And that is just an amazing feat, that like the fact that it can be a climate solution in that way of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere is just something that I don't think we always appreciate. And not only that, but when you build healthy soil will filter pollutants out of runoff in our coastal communities. Like 60 to 95% of urban runoff can be cleaned through healthy soil when you add compost to it. And not only that, but you're helping to support local food production on farms, and you're supporting biodiversity. So really, they say composting is like a win-win-win because it has so many benefits besides just emissions and carbon reduction.
You point out that the ocean stores a lot of this excess energy that is being held in the atmosphere. And in a sense, it's Earth's battery. Unfortunately,
Yes.
battery we're going to be living with having been warmed for potentially centuries. Is 11th Hour doing any other work to raise awareness around the opportunity to lower ocean temperatures through this kind of activity? How do you communicate that? And particularly a young person that you want to bring into this discussion, how do you engage them with that idea?
First, it's getting people to understand how important the ocean is to all of us, whether or not you live on the coast or in the middle of the country. The ocean, they're like the lungs of the planet, right? Like they produce half of the oxygen that we breathe every single day. They absorb all of this excess temperature, like heat that we're putting out into the atmosphere. And so making those connections for people to realize how important the ocean is to them, but then also showing them that if you love the ocean, it starts on land. Like it is about collective action. It is about what we all can do as individuals, but then also telling our decision makers, to consider these types of things when they're creating policy and all of that, those types of decision making. So when it comes to ocean temperature, we are working towards a future where the ocean is healthy and resilient. And it's because we have created a strong base of people who understand and appreciate how ocean health is human health and soil health, and how these are all connected systems, and we need to start thinking of them that way.
A lot of people think composting is kind of daunting or
Yeah.
smelly. That's the other one. I had to
Yes.
convince my own family that composting wasn't just smelly. What are the challenges that people typically run up against when they're trying to begin to compost? You talk about some of these in the article. Share what you've learned.
And I will say, I'm no like composting expert. I'm a composting advocate, and there's so many more experts out there. But we did recently do a public survey, like a poll, to understand like what are people's barriers to why aren't they composting? What's the thing that's keeping them from doing it? And what was striking to us from that research was it wasn't that people didn't understand that composting was a good activity that we should be doing. It was that they felt like they didn't know how to do it. They felt like it was too complicated. They didn't know what their options were. The smell and the rodents are definitely part of that. But what I think we found that was very encouraging from that research was, one, we don't have to like get people on board for why composting is good. It's just how do we show them it's good and it's easy. There are so many more options now. You can do it in your backyard. You can get a collection service and put it out on your curb to be collected. You can bring it to the farmer's market or the transfer station. You can have a worm bin under your kitchen sink. There are so many different options that's why we created this, the ocean is closer than you think, and so are your composting options campaign. And it's this idea of how to connect people to an easier way of finding like what their best solution is. So I would say, some of the challenges around smell and rodents, like those are things that just can be tweaked over time. You can put your food waste in the freezer so that it doesn't smell until it gets collected, or you can put it outside. The rodent piece is really more about mixing and making sure you have enough like greens and browns and all of that sort of stuff. So what we hope is that people understand that composting is important and that it's not difficult. There are so many options now.
I want to dig into the way that you are helping them find those options, but we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Now let's return to the conversation with the president of the sustainability advocacy organization 11th Hour Racing, Michelle Carnevale. Michelle, can you talk a little about how you're helping connect people to services? I know that you've developed a list that's mostly concentrated in the Northeast at this point of composting services. What's your plan to get people into a happy composting process?
Yes. So for all of your listeners who want to go visit this site, it's 11thhourracing.org/closer. And it's part of this behavior change campaign that we've developed that is focused on the ocean is closer than you think, and so are your composting options. And so we've put together a list of community composting programs, primarily in the Northeast, because that is where we're focused on right now, but there are national resources as well. Our focus is on community composting because we believe there are so many benefits to keeping composting as localized and as decentralized as possible. One, it means that composting doesn't need to be trucked all over the state necessarily. You're creating jobs, and like all those healthy soil benefits are kept within the community. You want to keep those nutrients as close to the place that you need them as possible. As well as supporting regional, farms and like a local food system. So there are many different community compost organizations, and I do hope that folks will visit 11thhourracing.org/closer to find one that's near their house.
So would that include going to the farmer's market, or are these primarily composting services? How would you characterize what's in the list?
Yeah, most of them are composting services, but they all have different kind of designs and approaches. Some do community gardens and farmers markets. Some provide services at like local transfer stations, like in your city or town. Many of them are curbside collection, in part because ultimately we want to make composting as easy as possible, right? Accessible to as many people as possible. We want every household and school and business to have trash, recycling, compost. And in the Northeast, that needs some effort to get to that level. I know in some parts of the country, they're already at that kind of approach and that design, but in the Northeast and in Rhode Island in particular, which is where our office is based, this is something that we are working with nonprofits, with local businesses, with policymakers to really help to advance the whole system and have it be, accessible to everybody.
When you think about composting as an ordinary consumer, a lot of people depend on what packaging says. This is compostable, but there's two different kinds of composting. There's home composting and there's industrial composting, which achieves much higher temperatures in the pile and breaks down the material more completely. Do you work with any of the brands that make compostable packaging to get them to help make their product circular?
We aren't currently working with any of the producers of packaging, but we do have a number of partners who are doing research and outreach around what type of certification when it comes to compostable packaging can be truly composted, within an industrial facility and not contaminate, the stream of food waste and food scraps. So that is where I think there's a lot more research and outreach to be done around what types of compostable packaging really is compostable and how do we make it so it's not so confusing, especially to events or community members who want to do the right thing, but the packaging can be confusing. And ultimately, if they, make the wrong choice, they could be, contaminating, a whole bunch of perfectly good compost.
11th Hour Racing's got a number of grantees that have actually diverted about 3.2 million pounds of food waste from landfills just last year. What was involved in that, and who are those grantees?
Yeah, so that's the measure of how much curbside collection we have helped support through probably around a dozen or so grantees and partners in Rhode Island. So as I mentioned, we are trying to encourage more of this curbside collection. One, because we think if we can have that be easy, you're used to bringing your trash can out or your recycling bin out, and now it's just your compost bin. We have all different types of grantees in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, throughout the Northeast, really, that have different types of models. Some are using bicycles in city centers to collect bins off of the curb. Some have, 40 trucks that are doing the entire state of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And what's really exciting is less about like the number 3.2 million pounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's the trajectory of growth. So we just started this composting work probably back in like 2019 or so, so 5 years. And to see it grow from zero, or basically zero, to 3.2 million pounds per year. I mean, it's just been this exponential growth year on year. And I think it's that momentum that's the most exciting. And one of our biggest successes is that we're seeing the appreciation for composting and soil health really gain momentum, both locally and even nationally. The federal government now is providing grant funding and investment in composting. And that is just a great sign, because we really need to scale up, and we're at a tipping point.
When you talk about, you mentioned this earlier, the idea of decentralized systems, and we agree, keeping the material local has many benefits, both to the local soil and to the reduced need for emissions for transporting this stuff all over the place. But we've also, we've talked with many folks on the show who are advocates of the idea that everything should go in one bin. It should all be sorted out, maybe locally, but maybe, regionally. As you look at the experience you've had over the course of the last 5 years, do you see a trend in either direction towards a more decentralized or a more centralized approach to this? You must be talking to folks in the Northeast about that.
What I see, the trend could very easily go towards a more centralized system, a more industrial, waste management system. And I think what we are trying to invest in, specifically through our grant making, is this more decentralized model, because it does have so many local community benefits, and it's about creating stronger communities through like intentional support for these types of initiatives. I will say, I do think composting at the scale we will need it nationally is going to take lots of different solutions of various different scales, locations, different methods, and we're just trying to support the one that aligns best with, our values and our ethos around support. Community composters are so passionate. It's a tough business to be in, it's not, community composting is like, you're not going to get rich doing it, which is partly why being able to help support and invest in these local change makers really resonates with us.
But you can make a living, and not a bad living, doing this
Yeah.
that is restorative, that it's returning this material to the soil and helping restore nature.
Yes.
How can a listener who wants to see composting take off in their region or in their community take action to make that happen? What's your experience in terms of the most efficacious approach to getting a change to happen in your own community?
Yes, that's such a great question. And I've asked so many of our partners, like, what do you want people to do? Like, what would be the most helpful? And time again, the community composters that we work with say word of mouth is one of the most important ways that they grow their participation. You tell your neighbor, your friend, your relatives, you get your local school or your parent-teacher organization involved. The other thing, we talk a lot with local municipalities like the Department of Public Works, and when they hear from their residents that this is something that they're interested in, and it doesn't need to be like thousands of people, but just a handful of people who make that call, it can start the wheels turning and get them to consider this as something that the municipality can offer, or even just do outreach and promotion around.
That's so true, and we found that as well. One of the we have a reader who took the food waste that they had and some compost in, and the food waste did not smell good. They put the lid back on, now the compost, which smelled like earth. That kind of a message is a very effective way to advocate for something like composting or any kind of recycling or circularity. As you think about the future, that decentralized economy that you're describing, how much food waste do you think we can get rid of? I mean, right now we waste 40% of our food. Where could we get in terms of reduced waste and potentially feeding more people?
Yes, I was just recently looking through some of the USDA and EPA targets, they have goals around reducing food waste by 50% by 2030. I mean, those are huge numbers. And a lot of this comes down to local action, local solutions. And I think you're right that the benefits of composting around being able to support regional food systems, local farms, healthy soil produces better food and like outputs, and it makes our communities more resilient. We don't have to think too far back around how supply chains and pandemics and like how all of that could disrupt food systems, and being able to support local farmers and also keeping all of those nutrients local to feed our communities is one that is really important. One of our grantees that works with public schools in Providence, Rhode Island, their model is not just about getting composting in the lunchroom at all of these public schools, but about how do we first capture perfectly good edible food and provide it to food insecure people. Like, so there are so many benefits to thinking about food waste and wasted food that can have benefits for our communities.
Now, I know you do event-focused advocacy. Have you talked with restaurants about participating in these programs as well?
Yes, we have a number of grantees whose focus is just on companies, restaurants, supermarkets, and working with them behind, in the kitchens to understand like, okay, how do you logistically get your staff to know like what you put in the compost bin, what you put, in the trash or recycling. So we have a number of grantees that are working on that. We're working with local universities. Universities produce a ton of food waste.
They do. They've got a
And
lot of active students who are ready to do.
exactly. Picky eaters too sometimes. But yeah, this whole idea of even just showing students how the wasted food or the food waste within their cafeterias can even be processed at the school and then be used, on the grounds of the school or in a community garden, or really seeing that whole cycle completed.
Michelle, this is a great story. How can our listeners follow your work and find local composting solutions?
Yes, please visit us online, 11thhourracing.org/closer. And also on social media. We do a lot of social media and storytelling. And you can find us at 11th Hour Racing on Instagram and all that.
By the way, when's the next race you're involved with?
There's sailing happening right now in Europe, and yeah, tons of events this summer. This is a busy time of year for us, but we'll be talking about composting at just about all of them.
Well, great. Thanks very much for your time, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was my interview with Michelle Carnevale. She is the president of 11th Hour Racing. You can learn more about the organization, as well as find local composting options in the Northeast at 11thhourracing.org/closer. 11th Hour Racing is all one word, no space, no dash, and 11th starts with the numbers 11. Word of mouth campaigns about local solutions, advocacy, storytelling. These are the keys to regenerating community and creating a regenerative circular economy. 11th Hour Racing's sports-driven approach is an effective way to get far-flung groups of people involved in composting, but it's on each of us to make these changes happen in our communities. It can start in our own backyard. I mean, I did it myself, and compost doesn't smell bad or attract rodents when done right. You can find a composting barrel or bin at your local hardware store or garden center, and then just learn a little bit about how to mix the right amount of green and brown materials. That's food waste and grass clippings for the green, for instance, and say leaves and woody brush for the brown. Mix it all together the right way, keep tending it a little bit, doesn't take a lot of work, and you'll be on your way to having a rich soil to add to your garden each year or to use as winter cover in flower beds. But the next step is getting your community to be aware and involved in capturing food waste for reuse or composting. Ask local restaurants to donate unused food to food banks or meal delivery programs for seniors. Take the time to visit with your city council representative and the local solid waste management office. they're going to be happy to talk to you. Not only happy to talk to you, but they're going to be likely to take action because a citizen who makes an effort to communicate with them is also someone who can lead others to action. The answers to all of our problems start with citizen involvement, and nothing will happen until each of us recognizes that leaving the future to others leaves the future unprotected and vulnerable to abuse, ignorance, and indifference. And hey, here's an action you can take today. Please spend a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 470 interviews that we produced on sustainability in your ear by writing a review on your favorite podcast platform. It will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas so we create less waste. Please tell your friends, your family, your coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the fine purveyors of podcast goodness out there. Thanks for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.